beautiful, awfully different without you. Don't get around much anymore. Don't get around much anymore. That's the name of the song. Sometimes I feel like I don't get around much anymore. And I bet lately all of you have been feeling like you don't get around much anymore. At least not as much as you used to. Well, closing out our May 2020 composer series in style, we have none other than a great American hero, Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington was born on April 29th, 1899, in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. So he was born in 1899. That means that a lot of the inventions that came about either just before he was born or just after are things we still use today. So the telephone had been around. When he was young, the radio became popular. Automobiles started becoming more and more widely used. The television was invented, and even early computers. So you might actually say that Duke Ellington had a lot of electricity. That's actually supposed to be a joke, because our other composers were alive before there was electricity. So Duke Ellington just happened to be born in a more modern era. Anyway, his real name was not Duke. It was Edward Kennedy Ellington was his real name, Edward Kennedy. He got his name from both parents. His father was James Edward Ellington, and his mother was Daisy Kennedy Ellington. So they put the Edward Kennedy together. Anyway, that's what his name was growing up. Until he was in school, he was a very sharp dresser and well-mannered. So his friends gave him the nickname Duke because they thought, well, this guy, he's kind of like a royalty. So they wanted to give him a name that was fancy sounding. So they called him Duke. And the name stuck, and he was called Duke the rest of his life. Anyway, both of his parents played piano. And so he was learning a little piano growing up. By the age of 7, Duke Ellington was taking lessons. For you baseball fans, he had a few baseball connections as well. Growing up, he loved playing baseball. In fact, sometimes Duke Ellington loved baseball even more than piano. So it's shocking to think how that could have turned out if he hadn't stuck with piano all these years. We might be without the music. And there's more baseball, actually. When he was young, at least according to Duke Ellington, because he lived in Washington, D.C., one of the presidents actually watched him play with his friends, Teddy Roosevelt. So whether it's true or not, who knows, but it's a story he told. So one of his first jobs was actually involving baseball, selling peanuts at a Washington Senators games. A long time ago, there was a team in Washington called the Senators. Well, eventually the Senators moved to Minnesota and became the Twins, and then later on, the Expos moved down from Montreal and became the Nationals. Anyway, that's enough baseball history, but it was important to Duke Ellington. When Duke Ellington was 19, he married his high school sweetheart, Edna. And then he and Edna had a son, Mercer Kennedy Ellington, who became a professional musician himself. Duke Ellington moved to New York City to an area called Harlem, which was the north part of Manhattan. And he became an important figure in what's known as the Harlem Renaissance. To understand the Harlem Renaissance, we have to go back in time and kind of imagine what race relations were like in the 1920s. Well, back then, segregation was actually perfectly legal, meaning that there could be places where blacks and whites were prohibited from mingling. They either had to be in separate areas or couldn't even come in at all. There were a lot of white-only places, even up in Harlem. So in Harlem, though, the Harlem Renaissance was a bunch of African-American intellectuals and artists who came together to create this movement. There were writers, poets, musicians. At this point, jazz was becoming a lot more popular. And there was a club, though, up in Harlem called the Cotton Club, which was at that time for whites only. And inside where the performers were some of the greatest musicians and performers of our time, most of whom were African American. I'll just rattle off some of their names. You might hear some names you've heard. Fletcher Henderson, Duke Ellington, Chick Webb, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Fats Waller, and some singers, Adelaide Hall, Bessie Smith, Billie Holiday. These are some of the greatest musicians ever, at that time or ever. And unfortunately, at that time, it was a whites-only club. Now, it was expensive to get into the Cotton Club, so the performers were paid well, but it was not open to everyone. So it's important to understand that was the time that Duke Ellington was living in. Now, Duke Ellington was one of the first African Americans artists to embrace the Black Pride movement in a positive way. So a lot of his compositions had the word black in it because that's who he was. He was proud of it. So he had titles like The Creole Love Call, The Black and Tan Fantasy, Black Beauty, When a Black Man's Blue, Black Butterfly, and he wrote a big suite called the Black, Brown, and Beige Suite. So American history is not always pleasant to talk about because, let's face it, there have been plenty of people over history who were not treated fairly. But it's important to learn about it so that we can see where we used to be, where we are today, and where we want to be in the future. And hopefully we all want it to be better. And in fact today, well, for many years, it's been the law of the land that no matter what you look like, whether you're a man or woman, whether your family's been here for hundreds of years or just arrived recently from another country, we're all to be treated fairly under the law. And it's something we're still working on today, but it takes all of us working together. Speaking of working together, I want to make sure we get through a little bit more of the life of Duke Ellington so we get onto his music, because that's something that will always put a smile on my face, and I hope yours as well. A lot of the players in Duke Ellington's band stayed with him for a long time, partly because he paid them twice as much as anybody else was paying, so the money was good for them to stick around with him. But also, I'm sure just being around a genius like that would be a good reason to stay on for many years. Duke Ellington and his band traveled all over the country. They traveled to Europe twice, and eventually Duke Ellington made it back to Washington, D.C. In 1969, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Richard Nixon at the White House. In May of 1974, Duke Ellington died of lung cancer. He had smoked for many years, and he probably started smoking long before people even knew that smoking caused cancer. In any case, he died in 1974. He's remembered, well, most of all for his music, but in a couple of other cool ways. I'm sure you've all either been there yourself or seen pictures of these. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and here's the address, 6535 Hollywood Boulevard. So whenever we're all allowed to get out and about and do things, you can go check it out. It's not too far from here. And then another thing that's really cool, I'm going to show you a picture of this, a quarter. Here's a big picture of it because it's hard to see, even if I hold it up. There's the glare. Yeah. Anyway, you know how all of our quarters have a whole lot of different backgrounds. We went through all 50 states, and now we're going through the national parks. Well, in 2009, when they put out the Washington, D.C. quarter, they decided, of all people to honor, they chose Duke Ellington. I think it's pretty cool. There he is. They have the piano. They even got the detail of the alternating 2 and 3 black notes. And I was a coin collector growing up, so to me it's pretty cool. I always keep one of these here at Bethany, so when we're all back together, finally, or even a few at a time, you can come see me if you want to see this quarter. I'd be happy to show it to you. All right, now on to some more of his music. One of Duke Ellington's most famous songs is called It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing. Goes a little like this. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-wah, 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 do-wah. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is sing. Do-wah, 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 do-wah. Now, rather than me playing the whole thing for you, I'd like to have you listen to Duke Ellington and his band play it for you. But first, let's just talk about a couple of things. First of all, the form of it. A lot of songs that were written, not just by Duke Ellington, but a lot of people from like the 20s, 30s, 40s, and on, are in the AABA form. So let's just talk about the first A section. In AABA songs, usually each section is the same length, and it's usually 8 measures. So let's just count that to make sure we have 8 measures. It's about this speed, right? It's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, and so on up to 8. Ready? Here we are. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 3, 4. Good. So now let's just break it down into the first 4 measures of that. It sounds like this. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. So that note on ain't, that's kind of a cool note, right? It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. It's a real bluesy kind of note. If we didn't use a blue note, if we just used regular notes from the minor scale, I'll use that and you'll hear it won't quite sound the same. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Well, that's okay, right? It doesn't have eh. So it's like instead of taking the 5th scale note, it's a flat 5, right? That's the blue note right there. So it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. You can hear it right away. And when you hear Duke Ellington's band, you'll hear some of the instruments actually sound kind of like vocals, and some of the vocals sound like instruments. Pretty cool. The second half of the A section, it's a little bit confusing with the rhythms, right? It sounds like this. Doo-wah, 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 doo-wah. Whoa, how many doo-wahs is that? Oh my goodness, let me play that again. Doo-wah, 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 doo-wah. I'm going to show you what that rhythm looks like, and it might make more sense. All right, here's our rhythm. You can see it now. It's doo-wah, 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 doo-wah. Still a lot of doo-wahs, right? Oh, I have an idea. Let's cut it in half. Okay, for simplicity's sake, here we are. We've got half the rhythm right there. So here's our rhythm. It's 8th note quarter, right? By itself, that's not too hard. It's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, but it goes a little faster in the song. So each of these is a do, and each of these is a wah, right? So count how many do's there are in this whole rhythm. Ready? Here we are. Do-wah, 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 do-wah. Did you get 8? If so, congratulations. Because the song is in 4, it has to be written like this, so it looks a little more visually confusing. And also, the doo-wah does not start on 1, which is a strong downbeat. There's a rest on 1, so it starts on beat 2, which is already kind of a syncopation. So here's that whole rhythm. Ready? A 1, 2, 3, 4. Doo-wah, 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 doo-wah. So you can see how it doesn't always line up right on the beats. There's a little bit of syncopation going on. The B section, or what some people call the bridge, because it joins together the different A sections. So the B doesn't have quite so many crazy syncopated rhythms. It goes like this. It makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm everything you've got. So it's got a little more space in there too, so you can kind of get your bearings. I'll sing it again for you. Actually, I'm going to do the B section into the last A. All right. It makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm everything you've got. Back to the A. Oh, it don't mean a thing. It ain't got that swing. Do-a, 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 do-a. So that's how the song goes. It goes A, A, B, A, 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 B, A, 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 B, A, over and over and over. That's what you're going to hear Duke Ellington and his band play. Sometimes the instruments play the tune pretty straightforward. Sometimes they're making up their own little solos and embellishments. Oh, and you're going to hear one other detail. There's something you're going to see at the end of a trumpet and trombone. It looks like a toilet plunger. Well, actually, it is a toilet plunger. And that's used to create this kind of effect. But Duke Ellington once said, well, it was created first for the trumpet, and then somebody else found another use for it. I think he was just joking. But anyway, enjoy.
Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is swing. Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm every little thing you've got. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that clip. Duke Ellington was not only a composer and pianist, he was also an arranger. And you actually just heard some of that arranging. He could arrange his own music, meaning that he would write out all the parts for everyone to play to create the different sounds and things, the doo-wah, doo-wah, all the wah-wah, all that stuff. A lot of that was written out when everyone was playing together. Some of the soloists were making it up. Um, but he also was good at arranging other people's music. And I would like to end today with showing you some of Duke Ellington's arrangement of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker, which is played every Christmas. I'm sure a lot of you have ever heard a lot of the music. First, we're going to see a little clip of an orchestra just playing a part of the overture. lot of you have probably heard that. It's very famous, the beginning to Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. After all, it's done every Christmas somewhere. And before I play the next video of Duke Ellington, it's about 5 minutes long, but it's really fun to watch Ellington just talking, having a good time, showing off his great musicians. If you stick around for the very end of that, you're going to hear Duke Ellington's version of this part of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. I know you've all heard that. The Sugar Plum Fairy, one of the most famous excerpts from the Nutcracker. Anyway, I had the good fortune this past December to hear the Duke Ellington Orchestra play Duke Ellington's version of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. Now, it wasn't the same people you see in the video because that was 1960. They have all died since then. But the people I heard were fantastic. So I encourage you to check it out. It's a pretty cool piece, and it kind of puts you in a Christmas mood, even if it's not Christmas time. And it's fun to hear someone else's twist on such a famous piece of music. So I'm done talking for now. I had a great time putting together this composer series. It was a thrill to end with Duke Ellington, and I will let Duke Ellington do the rest of the talking from here on out.
Now, like the people's people. Ready? 1, 2, Columbia Records presents Playback. Your guest, Duke Ellington. Your host, Goddard Lieberson. And don't go away too far. Hi, Goddard.
Hi, Duke. As always, that's wonderful. And I love to hear you play, and as much as I love it, I have to tell you, though, that I think of you, I guess most, as the composer of Mood Indigo and Sophisticated Lady. Now, what do you prefer, being a performer or a composer?
Oh, honestly, well, you know my musical background. I never went to the conservatory, but I used to have a 5-piece band at the old Kentucky Club, and every afternoon I used to go to the movies. And the reason was that there was a symphony orchestra in every movie theater on Broadway. And directly from the symphony, I'd go to the Kentucky Club, trying to make my 5 pieces sound like the symphony.
Like a symphony?
Yeah, no success, but lots of fun.
Well, but did that lead you into composing? Or had you
Well,
done it before?
Yeah, I like to compose. Well, I like to write, but I'm much too impetuous. I mean, to have to wait to hear what I play. So that's the reason I keep the band.
Oh, you mean you keep this band, this is your private band?
I keep it, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I pay more to hear it than anybody.
But that's like, the time of Beethoven. Royalty had their private bands to play their music, so maybe that's why they call you Duke.
Yeah.
But anyway, what is this about you and Tchaikovsky? Because that's what you were playing before. The March by Tchaikovsky from the Nutcracker Suite.
Yeah, well, I thought that Tchaikovsky to Strayhorn to Ellington might be a pretty good parlay.
Well, it certainly sounds like it's going to be a good parlay, but I know this, that if Tchaikovsky were around and had a band, he'd be playing Ellington probably.
Oh.
And what we want to hear now is Ellington playing Tchaikovsky.
That's our cue, man. Go on.
The sound of jazz. Duke Ellington and his orchestra in an exciting new version of Tchaikovsky's classic, The Nutcracker Suite. Piano in the background, the Duke at the piano beating off and followed by his powerful band. Duke Ellington, The Sound of Jazz. Yours on Columbia Records.